All right, here we are. The Foundations of Value First Ethics, what I like to call VFE. So, let's get started. The reason I'm doing this is because ethical philosophy, in my view, is confused. And so, I want to unconfuse it with the VFE, hopefully with your help. A principle I like to use to distinguish between a VFV approach to ethics and a rule-based approach to ethics is that ethics is not a theory to be discovered, but an imaginative product to be made. And I like to think of this as a tool. VFV can be a tool. And what's the tool is designed to do, and you'll see some things here, I borrow heavily from negotiations. So it's designed to be a constructive tool for dialogue and negotiations. It's how we talk, and you'll see the strength of this as I go through, I hope. Now, I want to throw out some terminology I use a little bit differently. It's consistent with how you understand these words, but I want to be very specific how I'm using the words so you understand that what I want you to think about when I'm using the words. Good, I just mean it in the constructive sense, something that is constructive. Bad, counterproductive. You're not achieving your goals. Morally right. We don't usually use right to mean anything more than morally. We can sometimes use it for other things, but there's such a moral overtone to it. I figure I will just not use it. So morally right and morally wrong, right or wrong, I try to avoid those terms unless I'm specifically talking about morals, which I try to avoid in terms of the own theory of VFE. Now, factually wrong, I would say incorrect. Factually right, I'd say correct. And VFE, of course, is values first ethics, and RBE is, of course, rule-based ethics. So I don't like using moral language. I don't want us to be confused, or you be confused with when I'm talking about a moral idea and a VFE idea. So that's why I sort of want to distinguish this here. VFD is not a moral code, it is a value code, or an ethical code, if you will. Values are made. They are not inherent. This is a funny thing that needs to be discussed. You want a car is what creates value for the car. The car itself does not have value until you want it. Now you go, so but cars have inherent value. Well, not really. The thing is, too, and this is something that people get really weirded out about, everything has a price, but it doesn't make anything cheap, because sometimes we have to pay a really high price for something. Total value is what you're willing to pay for it, in time, in money, in freedoms, maybe in life itself. Something so valuable you're willing to lay down your life for it. Not all of these things are the same, but they're similar in that they share freedoms. Usually what we're trying to do is freedoms. Freedom to survive would be a freedom. We really aren't looking at things other than freedoms. And the idea here that I like to point out, and this is an idea, is an artificial intelligence concept. And Dr. Alexander Wisner-Gross came up with this formula to quantify intelligence. He's an artificial intelligence researcher. He's like, where is there a formula for intelligence? So he came up with this formula, and basically all the formula says is intelligence wants to maximize future freedoms, and that's what this formula basically says. And I don't know the terms in the formula, not too important. You can look this up if you're interested. Okay, we need to talk about the problems with rules, or RBEs. Okay. The golden rule. Now, everyone just thinks it's the gold standard in ethics, right? Well, there's a value underneath this rule, and the value is fairness. That is the driving force behind this rule. It's trying to get at fairness. So it's a rule trying to dig up fairness, but it has a problem. The rule often fails because it assumes we all want the same things. We don't all like vanilla ice cream. Some of us like chocolate ice cream. And you say, well, but those are preferences. Well, here's the thing. With values first ethics, everything counts as a value. We don't need to distinguish between ethical values and other values are all the same thing. We can treat them all as the same thing. So we don't have to worry about this confusion of what is an ethical value and what is a value. They're all the same thing. They're all values. Thou shalt not steal. Now, this has a problem, right? People can die if you let. There are circumstances where, I can't take that baseball bat because that would be stealing, but you need to smash in a window to pull someone out to save their life. You can think of any number of scenarios where a stealing act might be considered worth the act because you'd save somebody's life. Thou shalt not kill. So, okay, that we never want to kill people. Well, the Catholic Church didn't think so. They, in fact, developed the just war theory because they were concerned that people wouldn't kill. There's bad people, and sometimes we need to kill them. Okay, that's what the Catholic Church felt was so important. They needed to come up with a just war theory. So here what I'm showing you is that values undermine rules. The point of a rule is to get at values, but values can undervalue or undermine the rule itself. And that's why I say values come first. Now rules will change to reflect the values. But what is the underlying value? That's something we really need to ask. Now, Immanuel Kant, born in 1700s, is kind of referred to as kind of the beginning of ethical thinking. But he wasn't thinking about tools like I am. He wanted a theory. He wanted a principle to start with. And so he came up with something that he thought was a good place to begin. People are ends in themselves. Okay, that's kind of a value. So he said, well, okay, we shouldn't treat people as means to an end. So we shouldn't use people. People shouldn't be used. Immediately there's a problem. How do you get work done? Aren't you using people to get something you want, like a house, to help build your house? You're using people to build your house. That's not fair. You're treating them as ends to a goal. VFE solution. Treat people as creators of value. They're not values in themselves. They are the creators of value. Their value is in their ability to create wants. So along comes Harris, 200 some odd years later, and is it 200 years later? No, less than 200 years. But, he comes along and he says, I'm going to write the moral landscape. We got to deal with this problem of morality. And so he thinks, okay, Kant may be a little, let's just move the goalpost a little bit. Let's put it down to sentient creatures. But he basically accepts the premise that people are sentient creatures or ends in themselves. So he doesn't really change Kant's assumption. However, I would say to Mr. Harris, I'd say, look, values come from what people want. Values is not a person, it's not a place or a thing in themselves. It is their wanting that creates value. Now, if you want a piece of land, the land is valuable to someone, but the value is to that person. It's to the people that want it and what they want it for, not in itself. Now, please, I think Kant and Harris are well-intentioned and they're trying to do a good thing. I just don't think they understand the importance of putting values first. They're trying to put rules first. They're trying to obligate people to rules. Now, let's just sort of look at values in a little different way to just sort of see how they're kind of abstract. Values are really abstract. They're not concrete. And so we sort of look at it from an informational standpoint. What is financial value? Money? Is financial value money? Or is it a reference to something? It's a reference to value, right? A piece of paper is just a reference to money. It's not. The value isn't in the money, it's in the reference to the money. Is the value in the car? Now you could think of a way of you could steal a car and you would in some ways steal some of the value of the car because you wouldn't be able to drive it in public because they know it's a really fancy car and you couldn't possibly afford a fancy car. Where do you get that car? They look at the license plate, it's not your car. So you'd have to keep it in your garage forever. You wouldn't be able to use it. So the value in the car isn't the car itself. The value is in your ability to use the car. So it gives you freedom. The freedom of choice, the freedom to move, the freedom to be recognized. Hey, that's a cool car, man. He's pretty cool. So it can have more than just the freedom to move. It can have aesthetic values. You can have social status value. So it can have a lot of different values. But the value isn't the car itself. It's the people wanting it. It's the status or whatever. It's a wanting. Okay, we can apply this same concept to words. A word is valuable because of the ink. Ink is what the most important thing about a word is, the ink you use. Yeah, I don't think so. How about the spelling of the word? Yep, get it spelled right. It's the word. That's the word. That's what's important. Spell it right. I think there are 18 different spellings for mackerel. So which one's the most valuable spelling of mackerel? Okay. The importance of a word is a reference to an idea. Now, it could be a reference to a thing, but the idea can also be thought of as... Ideas can be thought of as things too, but it's a reference to an idea. So, what's going on here? Ethics has been very reductive, and there's constructive versus reductive ethics. We've tried to reduce it down to the essence of the rule. They're trying to find the rule that governs ethics. Problem is, we don't know what we ought to be the rules. Now, there's this thing in ethics, it's the is-ought problem. It's not really a problem so much as just not understanding what it is you want. Within every ought contains if you want. I don't care if it's an authoritarian approach or however you want to approach the problem, you have an underlying assumption of if you want X. If you want a civilized society, you need to have these rules. Whatever you do, there's a want behind that. And it's important to realize that, because it means that oughts are subordinate to wants. So you can always ask them, you ought to do something. Well, what are you saying I should want? Which is not usually the question people ask of people that say, well, you ought to do that. Well, you want morality, don't you? Okay, well, we want something that's moral. Now, the is part of the problem is science is an is. It's necessarily reductive. It's trying to figure out what are the rules of the universe. That's fine. The rules of the game. What are the rules of the game? And that's a good way to think about science. It's not necessary to think about science as finding the rules for ethics, because ethics aren't discoverable. They're created. We have to create rules. It's things we want to live by. Wants are constructive. What is it that you want? That is a starting point. You don't have to justify an ethic, or a want, rather. I want it because I want it. Now, you can justify it. You can say, well, I want it because it's going to get me X. Well, you could also want this, and you could get X with this. So it's a starting point, and we can objectively say you want that. And you can say well, you can tell people maybe why you shouldn't want that. But that's where ethics should start. Ethics should be constructive. I mean, let's not worry about the rules. Let's first talk about what we want. Because ultimately, what we want, whether you're Kant or whether you're Sam Harris, we want to maximize the benefits of our values. We want to maximize our values. We want to have more of those things that we value. We want to live in peace, no? I mean, that's sort of like we can agree on that, right? We don't need to talk about how we get to peace. We can at least agree that we want peace, right? So that's a starting point. Whips and chains versus buy-in and negotiation. And this is the critical aspect of the defining part of why this is so important. And let's look at the rule-based approach. Telling people they're obligated is a form of slavery, right? Saying you have to do this. So, or this is the rule, you will obey the rule. It's authoritarian. Telling me they are wrong is a form of punishment. You're wrong. We're trying to punish them because you've disobeyed the rule. You're wrong. It's not constructive. It's just a man of punishment. Boom. Smack them with the wrongness. Okay, values first approach to ethics is the opposite. It's the buy-in. What is it that you want? So you are buying into the idea. So before you can even start any negotiations, you have to say, well, what is it that you want? So what are we negotiating here? So we got to get buy-in. What are you willing to do or do and you don't want to do? Negotiations. So we get the buy-in, and then we can begin negotiation. So it's a fundamentally different approach to ethics. And you say, well, this isn't ethics. It is ethics, and it's very ethical. We don't need morals. We need ethics. Value for its ethics implies the ends justify the means. Yes, I'm afraid I'm going to go there. It does imply that. And is exactly backwards of what you need rules to figure out. Rules don't get you what you want. Start with what you want and then figure out how you can get what you want. You have to negotiate for it. And this is something else. All actions have a good or bad value. You can't simply say, well, this doesn't matter. It has no bearing on the situation. All actions have a bearing on the future outcomes. You know, it's the idea of the butterfly wing, then you create a tornado in wherever. Now, just because I may not be able to determine the value, I mean, I don't know the outcome of this particular action, but I don't see anything that this is going to hurt somebody, right? So we can't know the actual outcome of an action, but it doesn't mean that action doesn't have an ethical value. And that's what I really want to point out here. VFE requires you to be very vigilant in terms of the effects of your behavior. No behavior is a free lunch. You know, you can't get away with making an action and think, well, that's completely free of any ethical obligations. Every action has an ethical component. No free lunches. And this also means no action is inherently good or bad. Entanglement. And what I mean by entanglement is everything's together. We got to look at the context to determine the value. You can't see or hear something and know if it's good or bad. You might have to use a scientific method to determine whether that behavior has good effects or bad effects. You won't necessarily know simply by the behavior itself. You have to ask questions. Why? Now, this is kind of esoteric, but I am putting it here to sort of back up the difference here. Value dictates the behavior in the same way as a neural net dictates the behavior based on the goals. So this is really applying a neural net approach to ethics. So I have a scientific example of why this works, or why I think it will have great results in terms of how we perform ethical evaluations. Applications of value first ethics. So me telling you what I want is ethical. I mean, I would even argue there's an obligation inherent in me telling you what I want, because that way we can begin negotiations. So the freedom of speech, one of its values is getting people to tell you what it is they want. So it's ethical. It's important that we tell people what we want. Me telling you what you should want is not. For example, you should want the death penalty. Now, me just telling you should want it's not going to be useful, right? Because why? What value is it? I mean, why would I want to kill someone? It's against my principle of thou shalt not kill, right? Well, here's what I'm saying. It's ethical for me to tell you this is why. because we're going to talk about the values here. Killing people is cheaper than keeping them alive in prison. Well, that's an argument. I'm not saying I support it, because I don't want to be considered mean, but it is an example of a value. It's cheaper. We're keeping people in prison. Are we really accomplishing anything? Let's just kill them off, save a lot of money, and we won't have these people. Okay, there's an argument to that. Most people won't make that argument, and I'm not going to make that argument, but I am using that as an example argument. Negotiations is ethics in practice. Right? This is ethical. Negotiations is ethical because what we're doing is we're matching up our values. And we're trying to figure out how we can achieve our values. Economics is also ethics in practice. It's really negotiations. In another term, we're negotiating with money. It's more of a fluid dynamic. We don't see it as ethical. When you buy something, you're actually voting for that thing. You're saying, I like that thing. It's a matter of voting. I'm willing to put money down on it. You're giving some of your freedom for that thing. You're negotiating for it in the sense that you're giving them money. It's so quick negotiations, you don't realize it's negotiations. Some countries negotiate more. What are you willing to pay? Like, how much does it cost? Now, this is an interesting aspect of ethics that needs to be pointed out sometimes. The universe allows for evolution. It's not optimized for us. And this is important when we try to talk about what is ethical. What's the universe play? What's important about the universe in ethics? How does the universe tell us? Is the paper that we write words on have to do anything with the words themselves? And that's what the evolutionary, this relationship between the universe and evolution. The universe allows for evolution to occur. It allows you to write words on a page. In this case, words in DNA. Evolution is, of course, the product of natural selection. It's the origins of ethics. In fact, we know creatures have ethical behaviors. So there is a push towards ethical behavior in social animals. It is, however, not ethics. It doesn't tell us what is ethical, what is the best ethical practice. And the whole reason of intelligence, or a reason for intelligence, is this optimization that intelligence is trying to do. It's trying to optimize things. It's trying to maximize future freedoms. So we can think of intelligence as evolution as being a substrate of intelligence. I think I said this wrong. Intelligence is a substrate of evolution. It's on top of evolution. It is an emergent property of evolution, would be a better way of stating it. And this relationship between ethics and intelligence, we come back to minimizing effort and maximizing future freedoms. This is, again, Dr. Alexander Wisner-Gross's formula. I would argue that ethics is an emergent property or objective of this formula. So I'm trying to show you where ethics comes from, give you a pathway to find ethics. How does it fit into the big picture of things? Rights versus responsibility. There are no inherent rights in VFE. There is only what you want. So it doesn't give you any rights to say, well, I'm a VFE philosopher and I believe we should apply VFE. All it says is, hey, I think we should start with wants. I think we should start with what we want. There are no rights inherent. I have a right to be angry. Well, you are angry, or you want to be angry, but you don't need nor do you get a right to be angry. VFE doesn't give you that right. What anyone wants does not change. Whatever you want to be angry, you want everything you want, that doesn't change. How we argue for what we want does. And this is why I say it's a dialogue approach to ethics. We don't have any freedoms. Well, I get this because it's my right. No, you want it because you want it, not because it's a right. what I'm attempting to do with the VFE is to create a relationship between what you want and how you get what you want, meaning make you responsible for what you want. You can want someone to accept your behavior. I want you to accept my anger. I'm angry, I want you to accept it. However, it is based on what you want, not on a moral obligation you get to place on others. This is that idea of authoritarianism of ethics or morality. It's authoritarian. All morality is authoritarian. That's the nature of morality. We're trying to obligate you. You ought to do this because it's moral, because it's morally obligatory. So we don't need moral obligations. It's unnecessary, is my argument. Reciprocity works beautifully. We all like reciprocity. Reciprocity makes sense. Let's keep it making sense here. And if you want me to respect you when you're angry, you better accept me when I'm angry. That would be a reciprocal agreement. But here's the thing. It doesn't have to be like that. It doesn't have to be a balanced equation, or it doesn't need to be balanced in that way. You may not value, you may not need to be angry, so you don't need a golden rule approach to reciprocity. You can use this negotiation thing. I say you can be angry, but when you're angry, you have to do the dishes, right? So there would be a reciprocal approach to that. You've decided this is the way you want to balance your equation. Now, the reason this particular argument here is based on a comment stream I had with Alison Tiemann of the Honey Badgers, and I wanted to point it out because I use this as an example from that comment stream. She never did respond to this later argument. She kind of just said, "What the hell is he talking about?" Well, this puts it in context, I hope. Okay, there's a couple things I want to leave you with before I end this. Value ethics are all around us. So I'm not creating the values approach. I would argue there's a lot of value ethics here in our lives. We use it all the time. I say it's a very intuitive approach to ethics. Rule-based ethics, not so much. I would disagree. I don't think they're common. I mean, I think we use them as sort of an authoritarian approach. We use them in laws because we got to create a rule, so we kind of got in a habit of creating rules and not realizing that the problems we were creating with this rule-based authoritarian approach. Now, I use spelling as an interesting example because I see people using an authoritarian approach to spelling, and I find it amusing when someone says, "That's wrong." So, God dang it, I keep pressing the wrong button. So, the same would be true. It's wrong for a man and a man to get married. Now, these are kind of a rule-based thinking. We just say it's wrong. We don't really understand but what are the values here in play in spelling in terms of marriage. So let's think about this from a values ethics perspective. I'm going to place responsibility on what it is you want. So let's take spelling as an example. Why is spelling bad? It makes it hard to read. It makes the message unclear. So these are good reasons to point out somebody's spelling. Hey, that word doesn't look right. Or you use it, I think what you really mean to say is. So clarification is necessary. So spelling better would give you better results in terms of getting your message across. That is, why should you spell something right? Not that it's wrong. That's not a good reason. And the same would be for men and men getting married. Marriage. What is it that you want to accomplish by calling two men married? Okay? What is it that we want to accomplish? Why is it important? I see the institution of marriage as a foundation for parenting and child rearing. Aha! So how do you view the institution of marriage? So these are value arguments in terms of marriage. Now, this is just an argument, and I use them because they're simple to describe. But what are the values in play? And we can talk about those values without getting into a moral argument. Well, I have the right to do this, or I have the things. We can talk about them in rational ways. And this helps break us out of our moralization of arguments. sorry, I do have a part 2 coming, and I will probably start that with values misalignment and just sort of go into more about values. I hope you found this educational, or at least informative. At least I'll have this to point to when I say, well, this is the approach to ethics that I'm using, a little different than the normal approach to ethics. I encourage you to adopt similar ethics, but it's certainly not mandatory.